cover a couple of things, but mainly to help you if you're listening, if you're in a position in your life right now where you feel like you're completely stuck in the messy middle of it all. Perhaps you're in the depths of despair. Perhaps you're mid massive life change, whether that's having a baby, going through a divorce, having a job change, having an injury that's changed your trajectory. Or maybe it's even navigating something a little bit scary, like a health diagnosis. And I think one of the things that for me, when I first started Club Thrive a couple of years ago, was that it was an extension of the work I was already doing. But I think we've been in a period of real growing pain, identity change, and expansion in a way that I could never have predicted. And at times it has really confused me. Because when I first set up the podcast, it was all around helping women in the creative industries, or creative women, improve self-belief and confidence. But what I didn't know at the time, because my daughter was probably a couple of months old when I launched it, was I had no idea what was coming in the identity shifts and how my life would change in becoming a parent. I honestly just thought that I could continue my freelance life with my daughter there. Because my life had been this, when you work for yourself and you're so used to being freelance and working for yourself before a child, you're so used to having your freedom, you're so used to creating work opportunities, you're so used to being able to say yes to pretty much everything. So I thought that, when my child comes along, I'll just be able to navigate that and it will all be fine and we'll just fit it in because my partner's also self-employed and it will be so easy and we're so lucky because how does anyone manage it when they have a job? What I hadn't expected was the knee surgery I had to actually have such a life-changing impact on me physically. The surgery was worse than what was expected, so I now live with kind of chronic knee pain due to arthritis in that knee. Now, as someone who has always used high energy, high performing style of challenges out of love, I'm not someone that hates exercise, I love exercise, who's used running to help me cope with these things, who's expended a lot of energy in that way. Not being able to do that impacted me more than I realised. We had the world and the global kind of shift in October with the awful kind of attacks in Israel and then the repercussions of that on Gaza. Now, for me, that triggered grief that I hadn't felt since my divorce nearly a decade ago. And I had a week when all of those news kind of things were happening. It was awful across the board, where I felt so triggered I couldn't stop crying. And it was probably also in alignment with my period, if I'm very honest, but still I knew it had unlocked a pocket of grief in me that I had not felt since my divorce. And I also knew that that was going to have a very big knock-on effect globally, because you just know when countries are trying to fight an ideology that it's just not going to work. And I have found that unbelievably complicated to navigate over the last 2 years. Partly because also becoming a mum has opened up my eyes to the world in a way that I never, ever expected. I have such a deeper connection to awareness, to responsibility, to broader picture thinking. When I had my daughter, I was so het on trying to do what I could to build her self-esteem. I was basically trying to feed that self-esteem into her as a baby because I was so paranoid. I didn't want her having an eating disorder like I did as a teenager. And all of these small things, that kind of triggering of the grief and then this awareness of how hard people have it and kind of getting stuck into that alongside a parent, like so many of you are navigating, who was diagnosed with dementia or hadn't quite had that diagnosis at that time when I'd launched the podcast, but was struggling. It was a lot. And there was the grief of kind of being aware of how hard people have it, which I'd already known. I'd already had a number of privilege bubbles popped. But for some reason, that all of those things, alongside choosing to requalify and train as a life coach, which has been amazing, and doing that, that work with clients has been incredible, alongside the fear of not being financially independent as a woman and maintaining my career. And I think looking back, I probably had some postnatal depression. And I've worked with a coach over the last 2 years, anyway, the coach I've always worked with. But when you look back on a time that has felt like you've been doing your best, and you look back and you're like, whoa, actually, I think I was maybe in a heavier place than what I realised, or just didn't have the energy that I have now, or didn't have the vigour for life that I have now. There's just lots of stuff playing on the mind and in the body that we maybe only realise looking back. And in January this year, I hit a pretty bad burnout. And over the last 2 years, there is a point to all of this. Over the last 2 years, there's just been so much of an identity change that I think with Club Thrive, quite specifically, it's been hard to pinpoint actually where the direction of it is going. The content I've shared in this podcast has so much value. I was listening back to some of the older episodes, and it's like there is so much value in this podcast, but I've also had to do a lot of the work on myself in facing the fears of being seen myself, of the self-worth challenges that I've had since my divorce, the diagnosis of ADHD. How did I not even put that in there, like in this kind of spiel so far? There are so many things that can challenge us, that can hold us back, that can create this block. And then when you have curveballs that come in, you know, like family health challenges or your own health challenges, or even just an economy that has shifted and an online landscape that has shifted, that can take so much energy alongside shifting into parenthood. And what I hadn't expected either was, you know, I always thought, oh, well, I will build my successful career and I will just pay for childcare. But of course, we don't necessarily know what's coming, and we don't necessarily understand that actually in that moment, you get torn potentially with also wanting to be there for your child. So it's not just about ambition, it's also about fulfillment and purpose and drive rather than the pushing. There is a difference between driving and that kind of idea of, like, you're driving on a playing field, you're running as hard as you can go. And then the pushing of, like, going to a training session when you're exhausted and you know full well you should be at home under that duvet watching Netflix, but you push through and you don't have a great session on that training field, and you come home and you're exhausted and your body's knackered and you give yourself a hard time because you didn't perform as well as you know you could have done had you had the rest. And it's this balance that we always have to have with entrepreneurship and working for ourselves, alongside these very personal things, to really understand what it is you need and what it is that is going to help you thrive in the moments of survival, so that no matter what, you still stay as well as you can. And it is partly a choice. A couple of months ago, this whole year really, I just was recognizing that I was blocking earning money myself because of some deeper past self-worth challenges that I had. And the fear of success, the fear of what happens when I have wealth, which has been something I've been working on for the last 2 or 3 years anyway, really, since all of this news, you know, all of the atrocities in the world. And we see it in the economy, where we see people that are struggling. And I've talked about this before. It's almost like a survivor guilt. You know, I should be happy with what I have. But there's something in this where actually it really holds us back from performing as best as we can and fulfilling our own potential, but without it being performative. It's really important. There is such an image of high performance that has become associated with a very driven and purposeful and push kind of energy. Now, we do need that, right? We do need to get up and have grit and determination and tenacity. You have to have that to keep on going. You need the resilience, but you also need the vulnerability and the self-compassion and the understanding of when rest is needed or when recharging is needed, and of when you are denying yourself what it is that you actually need and what you're capable of fulfilling in yourself. And some of this comes through, unfortunately, like moments of burnout, where we have tried to fit ourselves as a square peg round hole type of thing into a mold that isn't best for us. And that's what happened for me in January. So last year, I had set up a wonderful in-person coaching company, was doing my in-person coaching in Soho. I was so het on having my own financial independence. I was so terrified of not having financial independence, after my divorce nearly a decade ago now, having to move back into my parents', understanding that for me it was so important. I'm highly capable of earning money, very, very capable, highly skilled salesperson. I've always been one of those people at companies that have done very well in sales. But for whatever reason, had those blocks around using those skills for myself. And that is the deep work I've had to do this year. But in understanding that as well, I was kind of out there in the world, authentically working, authentically driving my work, but in a way that was probably using a lot more energy up than I realised to perform as a coach, rather than to be Kate, who is the expert already. And if you are experiencing burnout right now, I know I've had a couple of conversations with a couple of you that have reached out personally in the DMs recently. Please always come and say hi on social media at Club5_, because part of this podcast is all about this connection with you as a community. is to understand where we almost bring burnout onto ourselves, alongside understanding what it is that is us responding to the environments and the challenges that we're in, which are very real. So none of this is about pretending. It's very much about being honest about what our challenges are, and then recognizing where we are creating some of that for ourselves, because maybe we're not doing things in true alignment with where our energy, our sense of self, our skill set, our expertise, if we let go of that control, can really go. And the reason I share about that is that, you know, especially with the ADHD diagnosis that I had, because I felt like I could not balance parenthood and having a sustainable business. I was like, this is just not possible for me. So I kind of was still creating an image of what I thought success needed to be, but not even from success. It was definitely about passion and care, but I was kind of like placing myself into an image or into an identity rather than allowing the identity to come from within me and out. So we can do it either way. We can like step into that future version of ourselves, or a version of ourselves that we create maybe with how we work, how we talk about ourselves, how we dress, placing those things on top. It's almost like getting dressed in a way with a costume. Rather than starting with who we are first, that energy, that sense of calm, that groundedness, to then be like, who am I? How do I move? See, even like thinking about it, my arms, if you like, you might not be able to see this actually, but my arms, there's like loads of flapping around my arms right now. Whereas before, if I think about that version of me that set up the in-person coaching practice and was like, right, well, I need to think about working with corporate people perhaps, or you know, this resistance even still that I have had with the creative part of me. I'm a very creative person, but because society doesn't value creativity, we put it down into one corner. And this idea as well of needing to build something for a very specific reason that has very decent value, right? So if I'm building a business to be financially free, to be able to be there for my daughter when she starts school, that's amazing. What a great mission. But if I'm doing that, and great goal, but if I'm doing that in a way that I think I have to do it, rather than what would actually give me joy and energy and be fulfilling and is practical to the life challenges that I have, or the life setup that we have, you know, there's a difference with how you're going to respond and how your body is going to be impacted by that energetically, also with cost of time, energy and money, literal money, like with travel, all these things that I just hadn't factored in because I didn't know. Because when you become a parent, sometimes you don't know these things. And the most important thing as well is that once you've been through a burnout, it's almost like when you've had a physical injury, your body is going to protect you. So what could also then happen, ironically, on the flip side of that, is that we become overly protective. So this past year, I've been working on recovering from that burnout, really focusing on what gives me energy, understanding how, yeah, my freedom-based lifestyle before was amazing, and I could handle that because of my ADHD brain, which I've joked about for decades, a decade, was easy to manage. And I had coping mechanisms and I had tools, and I had overcome a lot of the challenges with anxiety, with low self-esteem, with my confidence, with communication, that I was like, great, I feel in a really good place now. I'm gonna have a baby and it all will be fine. But what starts to happen, obviously, when we have a child or something that changes, like literally the foundations of our life, is that we have so much more to process. We're carrying so much more in a brain capacity wise. So, you know, if you think about people that go to a job, for example, if you have a job, you're not probably thinking also, you might be within your job, but you're not thinking like, how am I going to get work? Whereas if you're self-employed, you're coming at this from a place of not just parenting, but also, well, where is my work coming from? Now, before having a child, that wasn't a problem because I didn't have to think about time. I could just say yes to everything. I had 7 days a week. I was able to have loads of structured space that I hadn't even realized I needed. It was just there. I was just doing it without realizing. And I was just kind of able to juggle many different jobs, which I loved because I liked the variety. You have a child and all of a sudden your time is completely constrained. And it's these things that we learn in parenthood that we kind of try to ignore, or we try to micromanage, or we try to overcome in a way that still gives us the image of what we want or the thing that we want, but in quite a forced way. It's in quite a fear-based way, which generates a lot of stress that we don't even know we're generating, which is why we can burn out, because you're running on adrenaline, you're not getting a decent sleep because your child's not sleeping. Like, I mean, my daughter has never been a good sleeper. I have been very fortunate that on a Monday night over this past year, for most of the Mondays, my mother-in-law has had my daughter. you know, when you've got interrupted sleep, that is brutal on your mood, on your energy, and that starts to impact not only your performance but the amount of energy that you then need to use to keep showing up. Like, I remember last year spending 2 hours trying to clean the kitchen because I was so cognitively fuzzy, which is why I explored the ADHD diagnosis, because for me it was untenable. I was like, I literally cannot keep working for myself. This is not working for me. And so what I've done this year, I got the ADHD diagnosis in what year are we now? So 2024, last September. But I'd started exploring that in 2023. And the diagnosis I thought was going to be profound. I thought I'd like have a big emotional moment, and then I'd be like, oh, my life makes sense, like the eating disorder, the rejection sensitive dysphoria after my divorce, that all makes sense. I didn't realize those things were linked to the ADHD, which was why it's kind of important for me to get the diagnosis. I just wanted to understand that I wasn't going mad. But then actually I kind of felt like I was going mad, because then I was like, well, who the fuck am I now? Because now I have this label, but I'm not any different. But this is associated with all of these challenges that I'm having. So now what? And it's taken quite a long time to unpack that and to pause and to not produce content if it feels like I'm just producing for the sake of it, and to really, really, really trust in the bigger picture, to recharge, to take the time to say, who am I now as a parent? You know, last year I was really struggling with my patience with my daughter. I hated it. I was becoming someone that I was actually feeling a bit scared of. Not in a way of like aggression, just in a way of how the anger and the rage was boiling up inside of me. I didn't like it. It scared me. It made me feel a bit like what I felt like as a teenager. And I was like, something has to change here. So there were a number of things, right? I had to recognize what I was forcing. I had to recognize that maybe doing the in-person coaching in town, I was trying to push my business to grow at a rate in a direction that my life wasn't in that chapter of life, that it was going to be able to kind of work side by side. I think I wrote about it in the context of like, I was pushing for growth in a chapter that was pretty much screaming for surrender. I had lack of trust, probably both in myself and also maybe in not necessarily my partner, but in our setup as a freelance family. And this is the other thing. We cannot compare our family to another family because everyone has a completely different situation. And I think for our family perspective, we lost a lot of stability. And I will get Warren, my partner, on the podcast because he's an actor. And it has been an incredibly challenging time for us as individuals, but also on our relationship. And you know, when I first set up Club Thrive, it was for women. And the mission that I have is still very determined on helping you, if you're a woman and a mum, to still thrive, to have the things that you want in your life. But what I've also recognised is the pressures that it has for men and for dads. And of course, non-binary people too. But, you know, if we're talking about from the lifestyle that I understand in a heterosexual relationship, those gender identities can be incredibly challenging. So that's something I want to discuss more about in 2026, because ultimately this is about collaboration. We cannot have thriving homes, thriving lives if we're not working together. But I can also help those of you who have those insecurities or perhaps blind spots to see them and to overcome them. Because until we do that, we hold ourselves back. And that's where the fear of recurrent burnout or injury is actually then what stops you from getting stronger and stops you from fulfilling your potential or even feeling fulfilled, because you're holding back. And ironically, that can emulate the same sensation of burnout because you're holding back actually doing the things that really are going to help you thrive. So there's also that self-trust to say, okay, well, what risks can you take? What are you willing to try? And what do you need to do to implement to ensure that you stay well in that process, especially in these moments of life that can feel like survival. So I really wanted to come on today, and I am bringing a lot more energy now back into the podcast. We've had so much energy in the podcast anyway, but there has been definite moments this year where it has felt like foot on the gas, off the gas, foot on the gas, off the gas, on the gas, off the gas. And I just now want to really harness the power of all of this energy that I have built up over this past year in this burnout recovery to really bring us together and to help you on an individual level to truly thrive, even in those moments of survival, because trust me, I know they are brutal, and it's not about pretending that they don't exist. I've always been very authentic on that. It's why I've always kind of kept things a little bit messy, but where am I holding myself back in that too? And if we are able to see that in one another and celebrate the wins and also acknowledge where we are holding ourselves back, then that's how we create this new status quo where actually anyone can thrive. But it has to come from you and what you believe is possible for yourself and what you're willing to risk, what you're willing to play with, and what you're willing to accept you're denying about yourself right now. Because that for me has been 100% the biggest, probably one of the biggest things, is where have I been holding myself back from earning the money I know I'm capable of creating, doing what I really love and trusting that that is enough. And also trusting that I am enough and trusting that you are enough. You know, it's this individual journey that we go on, especially if you have had life challenges or other challenges to explore. So anyway, there's someone coming in the door, so I better go. But make sure you follow the podcast at Club5_, and I will, sorry, chaos. Like, follow, share, and I'll be back soon. See you next week. Have a good one. Bye.